We are on Paranormal Radio Activity here with Bob Trazik. It's my second show that I've done here with WindyCityHometown.com. If you listened to us before, or if you'd like to listen to us, go up on YouTube and just punch up the date of the first broadcast. That would be punch up Paranormal Radio YouTube, go up on YouTube, Paranormal Radio 12113, and you'll get the first broadcast I did. Kind of the introductory, tells a little bit about myself, a little bit about the show, and today we're going to do a little more with that. Some of the direction and things I wanted to have the show go into. It's a show on paranormal radioactivity, so we deal with a lot of different things. We will be dealing with a lot of different things here. Psychic phenomenon, hauntings, fortune-telling, palm reading, just about all sorts of aspects of paranormal and supernatural activities. Today's show, it's a very wonderful February 18th here, President's Day. We've got a wonderful temperature outside. It's about 48 degrees, a beautiful day, lovely day. And I thought what I would do today on today's show is talk about the White House and the presidency, since it is President's Day. But I'm going to talk about it in a little different way. I'm going to talk about the hauntings of the White House. The White House, a lot of people don't know, is one of the most haunted buildings in the United States. And then Lincoln's ghost. We're going to do a little bit, quite a bit on Abraham Lincoln, because Abraham Lincoln likes to haunt around. Just to give you some up-and-coming ideas we have for shows here going, I'd like to do a show on Chinatown and Chinese superstitions and the Chinese supernatural. I will be running a tour in May. I think it's May 25th with the Park District in Summit. We already have that one sold out, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. But we might be running a second one because we've had a pretty good demand for that. So we might do a second show on second tour on that. That is anyway. So we'll be talking about Chinese superstitions, Chinese fortune telling, Chinese ghosts. Chinese are very superstitious people. The Titanic. My April show, hands down, no question about it. The April show that I do here with WindyCityHometown.com will be about Titanic. And I do it a little differently. I do the supernatural connection to the Titanic relating to suicides and different things that happened to survivors that survived the disaster. Egyptian ghosts, myths and legends of the Egyptians. A lot of people don't know, but many of the things that we believe today, palm reading, werewolves, vampires, this all dates back to ancient Egypt. We'll be talking about that. Halloween haunts. I want to do a thing on haunted opera. Opera houses and theaters are extremely, extremely haunted places, great for paranormal activity. We'll be doing a little bit with some opera today here, some hauntings on that. We'll get to that after a little while in the show here as we get going. And then also, too, I'd like to bring in some guests here from time to time, although I'm not too certain about that, how the direction of that is going to go, because I do these shows in the mornings, usually like at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And a lot of the folks that do paranormal and these things are all doing other jobs. They do other stuff. So we might have a little trouble bringing guests in the morning, but it's okay. I have many, many interviews on tape, and I may rebroadcast some of the taped interviews I have with some folks that we did real good shows with on another network that I do a show on, too. New Orleans ghosts. Going to do a whole spiel here on New Orleans haunts and the French Quarter haunts and New Orleans ghosts and that. A big area of interest from me, so we have a lot of information to give you on that. And we're just going to see how that's all going to go. We're also looking for some sponsors here for WindyCityHometown.com. Have a couple of ideas for that. We've got a few people that are interested in giving us some money here to sponsor. It does cost a little bit of money to keep these radio stations going and to keep this kind of entertainment on the airwaves. So if you are interested in doing a sponsorship with us here, look us up, our website there, WindyCityHometown.com. www.windycityhometown.com, and if you're interested in doing that, write us a little check for some advertising, and we'll be sure to plug your business or organization or whatever you have, and we'll do that for you. Okay, I'm going to start just kind of the same format that I do with my other show, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some newspaper articles that I found that were of interest over the last couple of weeks, because like I say, I do this show once a month. In addition to this being President's Day, and February is like the month for presidents because we have Lincoln's birthday, Washington's birthday, and then we do President's Day. Everybody celebrates this holiday a little different. Some of the kids are off today, some were off last week for Lincoln's birthday. George Washington kind of got pushed aside there. I don't know what they're doing with him. So we don't really know what they're, everybody does a little different with the days off that they get for President's Day. But in addition to February being the month of presidents, it is also Black History Month. And there was an article in the paper February 14th, last week on Valentine's Day. There was an article, and it's in the Sun-Times, and it was an uproar over Lil Wayne's Emmett Till rap. Lil Wayne is this rapper, and he did a song. In the song, he made some not too nice references to Emmett Till. And just in case you're not familiar with that case or what that was about, Emmett Till was the young black man, lived in the Chicago area, lived over in my area where I'm at from the Summit there. and was vacationing, went down to Mississippi with some family and stayed there, and they went into a store, and he whistled at a white woman, and very promptly, within a matter of days, was abducted from his home there, where he was staying with his relatives, and was lynched. Yeah, so it was a very big thing. And I actually did a show, some while back on Warg Radio. I did a show and actually had on Simeon Wright and Wheeler Parker, two very, very nice gentlemen. And Simeon actually wrote a book called Simeon's Story, and it's all dealing with growing up as young black people in Mississippi and the prejudices and things they had to put up with in their life. And they were actually with Emmett Till. They're his relatives. They were cousins, and they were with him in the home when he was abducted. They were there. They were eyewitnesses to the whole thing. They were with him when the incident happened at the store and the whole thing. So just a little bit on that. And anyway, this article, they want to get this song taken out because it does make some not too nice references to Emmett Till, and I think they did. I think Lil Wayne, this rapper, kind of recanted and took that out and didn't do that, left that out of there. Okay. Then there was an article, just in case you haven't been keeping up with any of this on news, about this meteor. They had said originally there was going to be this meteor that was going to miss the Earth by some, I think 17,000 miles or some ungodly thing. But one did hit in Russia. They had some meteor shower, and no one knew what was going on with this. It looked like a sun, like a very bright ball was coming down, and then you can see kind of clouds. And this did some damage there. It injured some folks and did some damages to homes, and some folks got injured from this. So it was kind of a strange phenomenon. So little by little, we're having some strange things happen here. And then a subject in the news. This one came out also on February 14th. That was a good day for the newspaper. This is from the Sun-Times, and this deals with the gentleman we're going to be talking about today on today's show, Abraham Lincoln. And they have one of Lincoln's hats, one of his top hats that we all know Lincoln wore, a very famous thing of Abraham Lincoln's. He wore his high silk, I don't know if they were silk hats or beaver fur hats that he wore, and they have a hat, and this hat is exhibited in the Lincoln Museum Library in Springfield, and they're not certain now if this hat actually was indeed Abraham Lincoln's hat. They do have it exhibited there, and it does have some fingerprints on it where, from 19th century etiquette, always taking your hat off and tipping your hat when ladies would be present, or taking it off when you entered the building. So it does have some fingerprints on it, but now they're not certain as to the credibility, if this hat actually was indeed owned by Abraham Lincoln. There's a few things that point to it being, and there's a few things that point to it not. Supposedly the story with this hat is, according to the article, is it was given to a farmer in downstate Illinois when Lincoln was there doing a debate, when he was running for the presidency. I don't know if it was one of the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates, but he was giving a talk there, giving a spiel, running for the presidency, and then as a gift he gave his hat to a farmer. And of course, this being something of Lincoln's, they kept it and cherished it over the years, and then somehow or another it wound up to the museum in Springfield. Another aspect to the story is that the man traveled to Washington, D.C., when Lincoln was indeed elected president. And there the president saw him and somehow or another was able to present the hat to him as a gift, and he got it that. But a couple of things about the story that aren't clicking is there's no actual documentation on it, and there's no actual documentation to the fact of this man ever taking a trip to Washington. For someone in those days, in the 1860s, to take a trip from Illinois to Washington, D.C. would have been a very big ordeal, so it would have been something that noted it. So they're not real certain about that. And then the flip side of the coin is, two things do click that it could be Lincoln's hat. Is number one, the milliner that made the hat had a store in Springfield, Illinois, where Lincoln lived. So it would make kind of sense he would buy his clothing or his hats from somewhere close to home when Lincoln lived in Springfield. And also, too, the hat happens to be his size. It was the hat size that Lincoln wore. So there's a couple of things for, there's a couple of things against, but I guess now what they're going to do is some DNA testing on this, and they're going to find out for certain, try to get to the bottom of that, and see if that was indeed Lincoln's hat. Okay, as I said at the beginning of the show here, my name is Bob Trazik, and one of the presentations I do, I've had kind of success with, is a talk on the White House and a haunted history on the White House. And it seems like every time I do the talk, in between lectures, I find out more facts. And I find out some new stuff that I'm going to be giving today on the air here. I'm going to give you the history of the White House, and then I'm going to kind of skip over Lincoln for a reason, because at the end I'm going to do a little bit more of a presentation on Lincoln. We'll do a little more talk on the Lincoln ghost and that, because you could do probably one of these whole hour show on Lincoln's ghost. Okay, we gave you kind of the history and the mystery of the White House here. So we'll start that off. Okay, White House was planned and started construction in 1792, in the year 1792, and George Washington himself, our first president, actually picked out the site, chose the area for it, and was there for the laying of the cornerstone. Now, Washington never lived in the White House. At that time, the capital was not Washington, D.C. In those days, they actually called it Washington City, named after our first president. Then later, the name changed to Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. So the actual first capital of the United States was New York. Actually, kind of unofficially Philadelphia, and then from Philadelphia they moved it to New York, and Washington was actually sworn in as president in Federal Hall in New York City, which Federal Hall is no longer there, but they do have a statue erected there on the spot. So Washington himself never lived in the White House, although there is some evidence that he may have gone in it and entered the house during the construction when the walls were raised and when the roof was up, just to see how things were going, and he may have actually entered the house, but we don't know that for a fact. So the first family to occupy the house would have been the Adams. That would have been John and Abigail Adams, and they moved in 1800. White House took about 8 years to build. Built of white limestone, or I should say gray limestone walls, later on painted white, and we'll get to why they were painted white, and then it became the White House, but it was not for many years that it was called. It was actually called the Executive Mansion, or the President's House, and then I think officially about 1902, under the Theodore Roosevelt administration. Theodore Roosevelt was the first one to use the White House on official stationery and letterhead. So anyway, Adams are the first family to move in, and out of 62 rooms in the White House, there are about 6 or 7 that are completed and habitable for living. So the Adams are moving into a very incomplete house, very huge, very big, open spaces, very drafty, not too comfortable a place to live in, and we have the famous story of Abigail Adams, for lack of a better place, hanging the wash, her family's wash and the laundry, in what would have been the big, they called in those days, the audience room, which we now know as the East Room. And that becomes our first haunt. Not necessarily every time you have a ghostly haunting is a ghost haunting connected to some sort of a murder or a suicide or some sort of a horrible crime. Sometimes it's just a very mundane, everyday type thing, and that's what that haunting is. And that's indeed what this haunting is. Abigail Adams' ghost has been known to be walking from the East Room through the hall, and they see her spirit there with arms outstretched, and then also accompanying her spirit are smells. They smell soap and they smell water. They smell dampness, as if laundry is being done, or laundry is being boiled and hung up in the East Room, which she would have done. Her ghost has been seen and presence felt by many, many folks through the years, and particularly during the administration of William Howard Taft. And Mr. Taft was president from 1909 till 1913. For the 4 years he served, her ghost seemed to pop up a lot, and actually was known to be seen by the domestic staff of the White House walking through walls. And then people say, well, why do ghosts walk through walls, and why do ghosts float through the air? A lot of this is because those walls or those staircases there were stairs there, or walls were not there when that person was there. And what they're doing is they're just following their normal path that they would have taken in life. So if their path would have led them that way, and there was not a wall there, from remodeling or something, that's the path they're going. So that's why you see ghosts walking through walls or floating through the air. What they're doing is they're actually walking up a staircase that was there at the time and is no longer there. Such is the case with Abigail Adams. So her ghost has been known to be seen many, many times, and her presence felt over the years. And there again, not from a murder. She didn't murder anyone. She was not killed there. No violence associated with this. Just a very mundane thing as hanging your wash up. Next ghost we have, and I just found this one out recently, is Mr. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson's ghost has been known. He's our third president. He came right after the Adams. He was the second resident of the White House. And they hear his violin. Jefferson was a very accomplished musician. He played the violin. And violin music, and his ghost has been known to be seen seated in the Yellow Oval Room. But dealing with Jefferson's character as it was in life, he's a very shy person. As soon as he acknowledges your presence, that you're there, he vanishes. He dematerializes and disappears away. But it's been known to happen, and people have heard his music being played in their violin music, and they go to investigate, and they either come in contact with the third president, or they don't, and they have no explanation for it. Okay, then we'll jump up to James and Dolly Madison, our fourth president, I should say, third inhabitants of the White House here. James Madison and Dolly Madison had the very unfortunate mishap of being the first family to occupy the house during the War of 1812, and during that war, in retaliation for what the American Army had done to some things in Canada to the British Army came in and actually burnt all of Washington City, whatever was there, including the White House. They torched it. And we have the famous story of Dolly. departing the White House very fast and taking whatever she could out of it, including some important presidential papers, as well as the official portrait of George Washington, the Gilbert Stuart portrait, which is the oldest item that hangs in that White House. It's in the East Room now. It's displayed there, along with a portrait of Martha, although the Martha Washington portrait does not date from the same time as Washington's. And the story goes that in her haste to leave, the portrait was screwed to the wall. They couldn't get it off in time, so what they actually did is had it cut out of the frame, rolled up, and taken with. And that is the oldest object that is in the White House today that we know of. And what we have with this is, now, of course, the White House was completely torched. The walls on the White House are about 4 foot thick. So they're very thick walls, and they were built, they should be maybe longer, thicker than 4 foot, and they were built to withstand a cannon shot. Because it being close to the Potomac River and close to water, we were never really quite certain when, the United States would come under fire again. We had just gone through the Revolutionary War, so we never knew when a war would strike our home front again. So it was actually designed to take a cannonball shot and withstand that. And it kind of proved to be true, because everything in the White House was burnt during the War of 1812, during the Madison administration. The inside was completely gutted, but the outside walls still did remain. So what they did then is they rebuilt. Now, that's where our second haunting comes from. The north portico of the White House, we have two sides to the White House. We have the round portico, which is the round-sided balcony, often called the Truman balcony. And then we have the other side, which is the squared-off thing with the 4 columns in front. And that's where carriages in the old days and now limousines and things pull up, and dignitaries come out and enter the White House that way, so they're out of the snow and out of the rain. And on that side of the White House, a British red-coated soldier in uniform, has been seen carrying torch in hand. And we're not certain of his story, if he was killed in the war, never made it back to England for burial, so his spirit's kind of at rest, and he keeps reenacting what he did in life over and over, throwing a torch and burning the White House. Oftentimes, his ghost, his manifestation, has been seen out there by the North Portico, and tourists or visitors to the White House comment on it and say, well, what's going on? Are they filming something there? Are there reenactors there? Because there's a man in a uniform out there. And they say, no, there is no such thing, and that is indeed his ghost. We have another ghost that haunts that North Portico, too, and that is the ghost of Anne Surratt. Anne Surratt was the mother of Mary Surratt, who was one of the only woman that was convicted of the Lincoln conspiracy. She actually owned the boarding house where the men stayed that plotted Lincoln's death, that conspired to kill Abraham Lincoln, and Mary Surratt was actually executed with them, although she herself really had nothing to do with it. She just happened to own the boarding house where these men stay. Anyway, her daughter, Anne Surratt, appears on July 6th. So this one we have kind of a time for. We know that. July 6th, and usually at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, her spirit appears at the North Portico, pounding on the door, rapping on the doors there, and trying to get the attention of the then President, Andrew Johnson, for the release of her mother. So we have two ghosts in that same spot that kind of appear there. We have this British soldier, and then we have the daughter of Mary Surratt, Anne Surratt, appearing there. Okay, our next manifestation that we have here, now the White House has been burnt and it's been rebuilt. It takes some time to complete, and then Mr. James Monroe reoccupies the house, and we have a couple of presidents in between there, and then we move up to Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson is our 7th president, and he's often called the People's President because he was a man, he was not a aristocrat, a Virginia aristocrat, so to speak, or a well-to-do person, uneducated. He was the hero of the War of 1812, because he did actually defeat the British at the Battle of New Orleans, which actually happened to be fought. He won the battle 2 weeks after the war ended, but the news kind of traveled slow. So anyway, Andrew Jackson becomes our 7th president, and his ghost is often seen in what is now known as the Queen's Bedroom or the Rose Room. We have 2 famous rooms in the White House. We have the Queen's Bedroom, which is reserved for high-ranking female dignitaries and visitors to the White House, and then we have the Lincoln Bedroom, which is often reserved for high-ranking male visitors to the White House. They're put up in the Lincoln Bedroom. 2 special places. Andrew Jackson's ghost has been known to be seen reclining on the bed in the Queen's Bedroom, because in his tenure in office, that was actually his bedroom. So they often see his image there, and also his presence has been felt through laughter and through swearing and stomping his feet, so they hear him. He was kind of a rough-hewn man. Mary Todd Lincoln claimed she heard Andrew Jackson's spirit in there, and she was upset by it because she said he was swearing and he was very uncouth, and she did not like that, and she was convinced that it was indeed the spirit of Andrew Jackson being seen there. And in the 1940s, during the tenure of President Franklin Roosevelt, Lillian Rogers Parks, a young lady that worked there along with her mother, Maggie Rogers, Maggie Rogers, they worked as maids, domestics in the White House. Lillian was trained as a seamstress, and she did many of the sewing and things for the White House. And she was doing work in the Queen's bedroom on the bedspread. She was doing some work on that, some repair work that needed to be done. And she said all of a sudden she felt a very cold blast of air, which we all know that cold spots are a sign of the supernatural or the paranormal. She felt this, and she could feel the presence of Andrew Jackson. She heard some strange laughter. She felt a tap on her shoulder, and she felt something tug on her chair that she was sitting and sewing on. So with that, she promptly picked up her basket, picked up her sewing utensils, exited the room, and said, "Look, if you want me to do the bedspread, you have to take it out and bring it up to my sewing room on the 3rd floor." And she never again would enter that room without the presence of someone else being with her. So we've had some strange presences definitely going on in the Queen's bedroom, or the Rose Room, as it's both known as. Okay, President William Henry Harrison. One of our shortest presidents. He had the shortest tenure in life, but apparently he missed out on the presidency in life. He's still there. William Henry Harrison gave a over 3-hour inaugural address in a rain, promptly caught a chill and caught pneumonia, and died after only 30 days in office. He was the shortest president in office. But William Henry Harrison's ghost still haunts the White House in the attic, of all places. We don't know why. Every new first family that moves in can go through the White House, through the vast storage that they have there, through the attic area and storage spaces, and pick out any of the furnishings, a lot of historical pieces from previous administrations, whatever they would choose to use. They can have brought down and reupholstered or cleaned up or whatever, and use it where they would like to in the private family quarters now. And many first families have claimed to acknowledge the presence and seen the apparition of the ghost of William Henry Harrison in the attic. And the man right after him, who directly succeeded William Henry Harrison on his death, John Tyler, our 10th president, his spirit haunts the Blue Room. A Blue Room in the White House, there again now, it's nothing to do with a murder or anything. This is the room where John Tyler proposed to his second wife. John Tyler, our 10th president, had the largest presidential family. He had 14 children from 2 marriages. And a couple of his grandsons are actually still alive now. And what happened with John Tyler is he proposed to his second wife, I think her name was Julia Gardner, in the Blue Room. And she turned him down the first time, and then the second time he was able to actually convince her. So Mary Todd Lincoln, again, claims to have seen the ghost of President Tyler down on his knee, kneeling before a sofa, obviously proposing marriage to his second wife, Julia Gardner. And through the years, too, other folks have claimed to acknowledge the presence of John Tyler in the Blue Room. Zachary Taylor, one of our other presidents here, not too well-known president. Zachary Taylor's wife is the only First Lady that we do not have a portrait of. We don't have a picture of Mrs. Taylor, whatever she looked like. There's no oil portrait or photograph of her. Zachary Taylor himself does not haunt the White House, but his horse. He loved to have his old war horse, because he was a hero of the Mexican War, and his horse he brought with him, and the horse was given free range of the White House lawn, able to graze the lawn and wherever it wanted to go without being interrupted in its old age. And his horse has been known to be seen grazing on the White House lawn, and when you miss it for just a second there, it disappears on you. So we have animal haunts, too. Okay, we're going to jump up a little bit here to James Buchanan. No real haunts or anything but Buchanan. But by Buchanan's administration, now James Buchanan would have been our 15th president, so he'd come in just before Lincoln, just before all the tumultuous activity of the Civil War would have started. Buchanan was our only bachelor president. The White House was kind of in run-down condition, and it came to be noticed now that it wasn't in the best of spots, kind of marshy, swampy, malaria-ridden land and very hot and very uncomfortable in the summer months and hard to heat in the winter. And Buchanan was very happy to leave the White House. He did do a few things to do some improvements to the White House, but he saw the Civil War looming, and he was all too happy to hand it over to Lincoln, and he actually commented to him. He said, "If you're as happy entering the White House as I am leaving, you're a very happy man indeed." And with that, now we come to Mr. Abraham Lincoln. And as I said, I'm going to skip over Lincoln, because at the end of this, we'll be doing a lot of talk on Lincoln. Lincoln's ghost is all over the place, so we're going to give you a lot of information on Lincoln. I'm going to jump now to Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson now, on Lincoln's assassination, becomes our next president. White House becomes kind of a very run-down place. Andrew Johnson is not too well-liked, so he's not giving a lot of money to redo things in the White House. So White House becomes kind of rat-infested, mice-infested, run-down. He did some cleaning and some painting to it, but there wasn't a whole lot they would allow him to do. And also, too, at this point, we have a lot of psychic activity going on again in the White House. Lincoln's ghost, recently dead, seems to be appearing. The ghost of Willie Lincoln, one of the Lincoln's children that died in the White House, appears. So we have a lot of things going on there. Andrew Johnson himself leaves office almost just escaping impeachment, and he's succeeded by a very beloved president, Mr. Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant, the hero of the Civil War, our 18th president. Him and his wife Julia given a tremendous amount of money to redo the White House, which really needed it by this time. They were given like $125,000, and this is in the 1870s, so it's quite a bit of money to redecorate. So they completely redo the East Room, new crystal chandeliers, new carpeting. They come up with something called Steamboat Palace decor, redo a lot of the private rooms, family rooms, new furniture is ordered. So they do a lot to the White House. They also, too, catch the spiritualist movement, which is really popular at this time in the 19th century, and they hold seances in the White House. And during one of these seances, the ghost of Willie Lincoln, the Lincoln son that died there, appears. And he asks about his pony, and he asks about his brother Tad, how his brother Tad is doing. So we have that. And also, too, President Grant has been known to communicate with his former associate, Abraham Lincoln. He had some communications with him. Okay, Grant leaves office. Our next president that pops in is Mr. Rutherford B. Hayes. Mr. Hayes takes office in the 1870s, and the White House now again, because the White House goes through a lot of constant use, and from state dinners and people coming in and out. And before the East Wing was built, the president's living quarters as well as his office and working area was in the White House. So the White House goes through a lot of use, and the White House needed some repair work and some refurnishing work and some things done now. And Hayes came in not too well liked as a president, so the Congress wouldn't budget him a lot of money. But fortunately for Hayes, him and his wife Lucy Webb Hayes, who became nicknamed Lemonade Lucy because she would not allow alcohol served in the White House, were antiquarians. So a lot of old furnishings and old things they liked, they used to refurnish the White House and made it presentable as much as they could. And later on, Rutherford B. Hayes bought a lot of old White House furnishings that were sold at a sale, which will be coming up. I'll be telling you about that. It's probably one of the biggest garage sales in U.S. history. Okay, Hayes' administration here will jump over to James Garfield. Garfield comes into office, and as we all know, James Garfield was assassinated, so he wasn't in the White House too long. James Garfield dies. The next man that takes over is Chester Alan Arthur. He was vice president under Garfield. And Arthur goes through the White House and decides, this isn't for me. Arthur, being a New York dandy and used to the finer things in life and the best in life, he says, no, this White House is just too shabby, too run down. It's run like a second-rate hotel. I'm not living here. So what he does is he does a walk through the White House and he decides what's going to stay, what's going to go, what's going out to the furniture, reupholsterer and refinisher, and what he's going to do. He brings in Louis Comfort Tiffany, who at this time in history was not known so much for their stained, well, yeah, they're known for their glass. They weren't known so much for jewelry as they were later in life, later in time. They're known as an interior designer. He brings them in, they redecorate the whole White House. Large stained glass screen is put up in the front hall. A lot of things are done. And Arthur goes through the White House storage and attic and has 24 cartloads and wagon loads of historical furnishings and things just sold off at public auction and gotten rid of. And this is some of the stuff that our former president Rutherford B. Hayes likes and buys, because him and his wife were antiquarians, even in those days. And so a lot of this historical furnishings they bought. Now, there is a downside to this. Some of these things become what they call hauntiques. Those are haunted antiques. And everyone that's been known to buy any of the things that have come out of the White House through this sale, a lot of these things have been traced down, especially in recent years, have been known to have bad luck with them. Some china and some things from this sale turned up on the Antiques Roadshow. And they were, because a lot of the broken dishes and, odds and ends pieces of china and curtains and carpets and just about everything else was sold here and gotten rid of by Arthur. He did a real clean sweep of the White House. So these things turned up on the roadshow one time, and the folks said, yeah, they are indeed having some bad luck with them. So not too nice a thing there. And that's like what they call the biggest garage sale we had in White House history. Okay, now we will jump up to a little bit more modern times here. We'll start coming into our next president. Grover Cleveland comes into office. He marries Frances Folsom Cleveland, and they were married in the Blue Room. And that's the only president that we have married in the White House, and the only presidential child, Baby Ruth Cleveland, who's actually the Baby Ruth candy bar is named after her, not Babe Ruth, the baseball player, as many people may think. Ruth Cleveland is actually born in the White House, and that's the first. So they were the first presidential couple to be married in the White House, and they had the only child ever born to a president born in the White House. And Frances Cleveland's ghost has been known to appear in the Blue Room of the White House, and this happened after her death in 1947. She died in 1947, and her ghost has been known to be seen in the Blue Room. And again, it would be probably a pleasant experience for her because that's where she was married. In between Cleveland's two administrations, Cleveland served one administration, lost, and then Benjamin Harrison served 4 years, and then Cleveland ran again. So he's like the 22nd and the 24th president of the United States, because he served two separate terms, not together. The Harrison family moved in, and Benjamin Harrison was actually the grandson of William Henry Harrison, who was the man that had the short term in office. And during the Harrison administration, some updating and modernizing is done to the White House, and they put in electricity is installed in the White House. And whenever you start doing work on things, when you do some remodeling and start moving walls and things, it seems like you come up with a lot of psychic phenomenon, and a lot of things start happening. And such was the case again. A lot of these old ghosts and haunts start popping up in the White House when they were doing a lot of work with the electricity. We're going to jump a few years up here in time to the assassination of William McKinley, who was president in 1900, and everyone knows McKinley was giving his speech in Buffalo at the Pan American Exposition, was shot through the chest almost at point blank and died, and then Theodore Roosevelt becomes president. Theodore Roosevelt takes office and, again, does a big remodeling of the White House. A lot of things are done to change the staircase, different remodeling is done, and unfortunately this would be paid for later on in life, because some of what they did, they cut into some major support beams and things, which later on in the history of the White House, I should say, proved not to be such a good thing. First World War, the administration of Woodrow Wilson, nothing too much going on except for the fact that the first Mrs. Wilson, Ellen Wilson, decided to have the Rose Garden moved from the White House. And this was not a wise thing, because when she decided to have the Rose Garden moved, workmen went out to dig the roses up and transplant them. They were confronted by the ghost of Dolly Madison. And Dolly had planted that garden some years before, when she had lived for the short time she lived in the White House before it was burnt. And her apparition appeared and was screaming at them, yelling at them what they were doing. And so upon seeing her, they put down their shovels, left, and the Rose Garden is indeed still where it is all these years. They never did move it. It's now called the Colonial Garden, or the Rose Garden, they call it. Okay, we'll move up to the 1920s now, which is a good era to be in for psychic phenomenon. And we come to the administration of Warren G. Harding and his wife, Florence. Florence Harding, like so many people in the 1920s, became very, very involved in the spiritualist movement, in seances, in the paranormal, in psychic phenomenon. She had a regular list of mediums and people that she contacted to know what was going on with the president's life and to know what was going on politically for them, their careers, and to guide her supposedly through her life and that. And Warren G. Harding dies in office 18 months into his term, and there was some speculation that the First Lady Florence Harding may have actually poisoned him because she found out about his extramarital affairs. He actually had a girlfriend on the side, actually more than one, and so, but there's never been any proof done on that. They never really exhumed his body or anything to find that out, but it's always been speculated that she may have something to do with that. And then the next first family that takes office is the Coolidges. Calvin Coolidge and his wife, Grace Coolidge. Grace Coolidge is confronted by the ghost of Abraham Lincoln in the Yellow Room. And the Yellow Room during the Lincoln years was Lincoln's library. She enters the room. She sees Lincoln with a gray shawl over his shoulders, looking out at the windows towards the Potomac River. He turns around, acknowledges the presence of the First Lady, and then just dematerializes. A lot of Lincoln's ghost stories start stemming from the 1920s, and people have a couple of theories on this, why this would happen with the Coolidges in office. A lot of this would be, they say, from the similarities. The Lincolns knew the experience of losing a child in the White House. They had one of their son, Willie, died in the White House on them. And the Coolidges went through the same thing. The Coolidges had two boys, John and Calvin Jr., and one of their sons died in the White House. So that's why they say Lincoln may have appeared to them just as an expression of his mourning in that. Okay, we're going to jump a couple of administrations here, and we'll hop up into the administration of Franklin Roosevelt. Now we'll start talking a little bit more about the Lincoln's ghost here. During the Roosevelt years, of course, we have World War II going on. There's the appearance of a mysterious black cat. This cat shows up in the lower levels, which would have been kind of sort of like the basement area, although the basement didn't come to the White House until later, after another major remodeling. And this turns up at times of national crisis. And this cat is seen walking through. It's a black cat, and then it just kind of dematerializes and goes through nothings. And he's actually been seen going through walls too, and they don't know how he does that. Lincoln's ghost becomes a big visitor during the World War II years. Prime Minister of England, Winston Churchill, was a frequent guest of Franklin Roosevelt and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and stayed in the Lincoln bedroom. And his first occasion he encountered the ghost of President Lincoln at the fireplace. Winston Churchill was walking through the room, cigar in hand and glass of brandy in the other, and he had just gotten out of the bath, and he liked to walk around naked. He liked doing this, so there he is with cigar in hand and brandy in the other, naked, and he encounters the ghost of President Lincoln. Lincoln turns, looks at him, acknowledges him. He said he seemed to have a smile on his face, and his comment was, "Mr. President," he says, "you seem to have me at a disadvantage." And upon his saying this, Lincoln's ghost just sort of dematerialized right in front of him, and that was that. His second encounter with Lincoln's ghost, he heard a knock on the door, staying in the Lincoln bedroom. Opened it, and there was the figure of Abraham Lincoln standing. After this, Mr. Churchill said he had had enough and no longer wanted to stay in the Lincoln bedroom, so he took residence in the White House across the hall in a smaller maid's room, what had been a maid's room for that floor of the family quarters, and he took his residence in there and said, no, he didn't want to stay in the Lincoln room anymore after encountering Lincoln's spirit twice. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands stayed in the Queen's bedroom now, a high-ranking female visitor during the World War II years, guest of the Roosevelts. She does not, unfortunately, fortunately or misfortunately, she does not encounter the ghost of Andrew Jackson, who is known to haunt that room. She hears a knock on her door, and her personal maid, unable to attend and answer the door and see who is there, the Queen herself goes and answers it and is confronted with the full figure standing there of Abraham Lincoln, top hat on head. Whereupon she faints dead away on the floor, comes to, and the next day at a state dinner that the Roosevelts are giving, she relates the story to Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt, and they indeed acknowledge it and say, oh yes, Eleanor Roosevelt says, yes, I felt Lincoln's presence many times. It's not an unusual occurrence. Staff have seen him. We've had folks seen him sitting on his bed, pulling his boots on. He dematerializes. So Lincoln's ghost pops up a lot during the World War II years, during time of national crisis. Okay. We'll get off the Roosevelt administration here, and we'll go into Harry Truman. Harry Truman was probably the first president that occupied the White House that was the first to be in office and actually said, yes, indeed, there are things going on here. He wrote letters to Bess and said, yeah, I sit here at night writing speeches and answering letters and doing things, and I hear the footsteps, and I hear the knocks on the walls, and I hear the creaks and the groans of the ghosts that inhabit this old building. Part of this was related to the White House being in a lot of trouble when Harry Truman took office. The whole building was in such bad shape from all the remodelings and cutting into the beams and things over the years. And what happened was the White House was actually in danger of collapsing, of falling apart. So they made a decision to actually have the White House gutted, the outside walls staying, all the woodwork, fireplace mantles, everything marked and cataloged as accurately as could possibly done to put back as much originality to the house as they could. But the whole inside of the house was gutted, and basements and sub-basements were redone, and modern electricity, air conditioning was all put in, and the White House was completely redone. But we still have the original outside walls, just like we had during the War of 1812. We have those walls standing there. So you still have all the psychic activity in there. And when you do this shaking up and you have this stuff going on, that's when the spirits seem to awaken. And we have pictures, they have photos of the White House tractors actually inside of it and doing the digging and doing the work inside there. And they say, yeah, they did encounter some spirits and some things in the photographs that they have no accounts for. Okie doke, let's see what happens. Now we'll move up into the Eisenhower administration. Mamie Eisenhower and Dwight D. Eisenhower in there. And Mamie Eisenhower, of course, she comes into a nicely redecorated and remodeled White House after the Trumans didn't spend too much time there during the renovations that were done to the house. And she decides to hold a wedding shower for one of her, I think it was one of her personal secretaries, and she decides this would be a clever thing to hold this in the East Room and have a clothesline put up and have all the gifts from the shower hung on the clothesline, reminiscent of Abigail Adams hanging her laundry in the East Room. Well, when they do this, Abigail Adams' spirit appears. Again, there she is, because they were doing something that she did. And her spirit appears again to the Eisenhowers. We'll jump up into the Kennedys here now, coming up into more modern times. Kennedys have many, many similarities with the Lincolns. The Kennedys actually move into the house 100 years almost to the day that the Lincolns occupied it, 1860, 1960. Mrs. Kennedy goes through a thing of redecorating the White House, and the White House should be a place of historic interest, and everything in the house should have a reason for being there. And so she gets many, many donations and things donated back to the White House, the Monroe furniture. A lot of things that were actually sold during the big sale many, many years earlier that Chester Arthur had. We sold a lot of the White House furnishings off, actually come back to the house donated. Well, unfortunately, like I say, with these antiques, hauntiques, so to speak, you bring in some unfortunate behavior too. Mrs. Kennedy acknowledges the presence of Lincoln's spirit in the White House. Lincoln's is like probably the more famous spirit in the White House. Many people have seen that. And, of course, with this, and possibly with this curse on some of these antiques and things she brings back into the house, we all know what happened to President Kennedy. He also becomes an assassinated president, as Mr. Lincoln was. Okay, with that, then, we're going to stop here. We've kind of come into more modern times because we're going to do a little bit on Lincoln. Mrs. Clinton, Hillary Clinton, acknowledged the presence of Abraham Lincoln's ghost, and Nancy Reagan came under criticism when she was in the White House for holding seances and big belief in spiritualism and psychic phenomenon. Maureen Reagan, the daughter of President Ronald Reagan, claimed to have communications with Abraham Lincoln and actually spoke with him. The present first family that we have in now, President Obama and his family, are the first, I would say, the first sitting first family that are in office that have openly acknowledged the existence of the paranormal. They say, yeah, there are things that go on in this house that we have no explanation for. Not only presidents and famous people haunt the White House, we also have animals. Like I said, we have the horse of Zachary Taylor that's been known to be seen grazing on the front lawn. We have this mysterious cat that appears in what is now basements. At that time, basements didn't exist in the White House, but since the Truman remodeling and renovation of the house, there are basements and sub-basements, and that cat's spirit has been known to see there during times of national crisis. The last time it popped in was during the September 11th, when we had all that September 11th in New York City with the World Trade Towers. That cat's spirit was seen down there, and they knew something was coming. We also have some White House domestics that haunt the house. We have a gentleman, African-American gentleman, for many, many years traditionally, most of the staff and domestics in the White House were all African-American. And this man's name was Jerry, and I forget his last name, but he was nicknamed Jerry the Feather Duster, because he did a lot of dusting of the brickbat and cleaning and that in there. And Jerry worked for 35 years. He served in the White House, and he always wanted to be doorman. He served in many positions in the House, and on slow news days in the 1880s, when he worked there, the White House would come to him, and Jerry would give him ghost stories. So even in the 1880s, they already had ghost stories in the White House, and Jerry would relate letters. And now Jerry's spirit has been known to be seen there, and he's been known to be answering the door, a position he always wanted. So oftentimes he answers the door when you come to visit, and then disappears. And then we have Dolly Johnson. Dolly Johnson serves as a cook in the family kitchen in the White House. She was brought in during the administration of Benjamin Harrison to do plain American cooking. And Dolly's spirit has been known to be wandering through the kitchens now in the White House, and they see her with her dress, and people have commented, are they doing something movie-making or something with historical, because there's a woman, dressed in a white cap and long dress in the kitchen. And that's Dolly's spirit, probably marveling at all the new kitchen technology and everything that we have there. Now, I'm going to talk, we have about 15, 20 minutes here, and then I want to get to some recordings here. We'll take a little time. Lincoln's ghost. My Lord, we can do probably one whole hour here on Lincoln, but we'll do some on this. Like I said, I kind of skipped over Lincoln during the presentation because I wanted to do some things at the end. Abraham Lincoln was a very, very psychically connected man. All of his life, from childhood on, very hard life. We all know the thing of Lincoln, just had Lincoln's birthday, or grew up in the frontier. He actually helps his father build the coffin for his mother, Nancy Hanks, who died. So Lincoln had a lot of spiritual things. All his life happened to him. Grows up studying, as we all know. His stepmother that comes in after his mother dies and encourages him to learn and to read and to make something better of himself than his life on the frontier, which we all know indeed Abraham Lincoln did do. Death and things were always around Lincoln. He lost his mother at an early age, the first love of his life, Anne Rutledge, in Salem, New Salem Village, where Lincoln lived for some years. They were not formally engaged, but nonetheless they were a couple, and they would have been married. Anne Rutledge dies. He loses her. He meets Mary Todd. They marry in 1840. The couple marries, and they take up residence in Springfield, Illinois. And after some time, with some success in his law practice, they're able to buy the home that Lincoln has on 8th and Jackson. Now, that home is very, very haunted, but it is not haunted by Abraham Lincoln himself. It is haunted by his wife, Mary Todd. Her figure, hoop-skirted figure of a female woman, has been known to be seen going from the kitchen to the front parlor of that home. The horsehair rocker, which was one of Lincoln's favorite chairs, has been known to rock on its own for no reason. They've investigated if there was windows or something that would cause air to make it move. The children's toys have been known to roll across the floor there. And the Lincolns did lose their second son. Lincolns had 4 sons. They had Robert, their oldest. Then they had Edward Baker Lincoln, and they had Willie Lincoln, and then they had Theodore Lincoln. So out of their 3 sons, the only one that lived to old age and to maturity was Robert. Eddie Lincoln died when they lived in Springfield. He was only 4 years old. So they think the spirit of Eddie and Willie, playing with the toys, may be doing that. The sewing machine has been known to hum, the treadle has been pushed, and then they hear rustling of skirts going up and down the staircase, like rustling of petticoats and skirts. So they believe very strongly that the spirit of Mary Todd Lincoln is in that home, because for the 17 years she lived there, they believe those were the happiest years of her life, outside of course, losing her son, Edward. A carriage has been known to be heard. Horse carriage rumbling along, horse's hoofs, in front of the home, and then you look and there's nothing there. So we have some haunts there in Springfield. Lincoln's tomb in Springfield has been known to be haunted. All sorts of places. The White House haunts, like I say, that's where he's more famous for. The Lincoln funeral train, the room Lincoln loves to haunt in the White House mostly is the corridor and the hall, which adjoins the Lincoln bedroom. We call it the Lincoln bedroom now, but in Lincoln's time, that room was actually his cabinet room and a treaty room where he signed a lot of papers. He actually wrote the Emancipation Proclamation in there, and many of the important decisions of the Civil War were taken care of in that room. And the bed, which is the Lincoln bed, which is a very famous piece of furniture, was purchased by Mary Todd and the White House, and that was the bed that their son Willie died in. So there would be a definite connection why Lincoln would want to haunt that room and his presence be in that room. Some of the things with Lincoln's life about his assassination, it's been said now, the studying and the knowledge we have of medicine and things now, when you look at photos of Lincoln, they said had he not been assassinated when he was, he probably would have died in a short time. There's some speculation now that he may have had an illness. The illness they think he may have had was called Marfan's illness. Some of the symptoms of Marfan's illness are you have long limbs, you're unusually tall, which Lincoln was. Lincoln's presence was, anytime he's in a room full of people, you could pick Lincoln out, even his photographs. When there's photographs of Lincoln with other people, he's the one you see, no doubt you pick him out right away because he's the tallest person in the room. Had unusually long arms, long hands. Cold hands and feet are a symptom of Marfan's, and we know Lincoln had this. He often said himself, he says, I could stick my hands in a fire and they would never get warm. He himself always felt cold. He's often photographed, and we know many stories and things written about him. He always wore a gray shawl. He had a shawl around his... Indeed, he was wearing a shawl at Ford's Theater the night he was assassinated, because he always had coldness around him. That's a symptom of Marfan's. And it's also a hereditary disease. It's passed on from, father to son or to children. And there's evidence now that his sons may have had this, 3 of his sons. Now, we know he lost Edward at 4 years old, so that's a child he lost young. Willie Lincoln was the second Lincoln son to die in the White House. The 2 boys, Willie and Tad, by this time had the other 2. 2 boys took sick with a fever. Tad was able to recover. Willie died. So Willie died at 11 years old. And then later on, after his father's assassination, the 4th son, Tad, he dies at 18 years old from tuberculosis. So they said. But it may have been complications from Marfan's. We are not really certain about that. So these are some things that they're speculating on Lincoln that he had. Also, too, another symptom of Marfan's is eyesight. And we know Lincoln wore glasses, although for reading, nothing too serious about that. Stooped shoulders, which we know he had. And a lot of people say, well, these are things that were just on him from the burdens of office and the cares of the war and this kind of thing. That's why he looks the way he did. But if you look at his photos, if you look at the last photo of Lincoln taken just before he died, just before he was assassinated, and look at a photo taken of him a year before, you could see in his face and his physical appearance the aging that went on. He really, really aged in a year's time. Very abnormal amount of aging. So we have cold hands and feet, and then also, too, one of the symptoms of this is speech disorders. And we know that Tad, the son that died at 18 years of age, we know Tad had some sort of a speech impediment. So there are things that go with it. Robert Lincoln, the only Lincoln son that did live to maturity, that lived to a ripe old age, has some things going on with him. Robert Lincoln is connected with the assassinations of 3 presidents. Of course, his father's. His father dies in Ford's Theater, and Robert, of course, was not at the theater, but immediately there after he's summoned, and he's at his father's deathbed along with his mother when his father dies. So there's his father's assassination. And then Robert serves as Secretary of War in the administration of James Garfield. And James Garfield becomes very involved in the spiritualist movement and questions Robert on his father's beliefs in paranormal and his mother's. And Robert is embarrassed by this whole thing and doesn't like to even relate this to the president. But he is invited to hear President Garfield give a speech at the, I forget what the name of it was, but it was the train depot in Washington on 4th of July. He's giving a speech there, and Robert is with the president when the man comes and shoots him. James Garfield gets shot right through the back and through his arm. The bullet goes through. He lingers through the summer months and dies. So Robert's present at a second presidential assassination. And then some years later, now in 1900, during the administration of William McKinley. William McKinley is at the Buffalo Exposition and receiving line and shaking hands, and Robert is present there. And a man comes up with a handgun concealed in a handkerchief and shoots the president point blank. So after being present for 3 presidential assassinations, Robert makes the statement. He says, well, I'm not going to appear with any other presidents at public functions because I just don't do well at these things. We have bad luck with the presidents. However, he does in 1922. Robert's now an old man himself, and he is present for the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial. He has to be there. That's the dedication of his father's monument. And he is there with the now sitting president, Warren G. Harding, and we know Warren G. Harding wasn't assassinated, or we don't think. He may have been poisoned by his wife. They're not certain about that. Warren G. Harding dies 18 months into his office, and another president, ex-president William Howard Taft, who is now Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, is there present with him too, and they do have a photograph of all 3 men standing together. Nothing happened to Taft, but you have to remember, Taft was now not the sitting president, but Warren G. Harding nonetheless did die in office. So Robert says, this is it. No more presidential functions with me. And for the remainder of his life, I think he died, this was 1922, his last appearance with presidents. He died in 1926. He doesn't appear with anybody else again in life. Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd, had problems of her own, a partial insanity, complications maybe from diabetes, a lot of strange behavior, actions, overspending, buying things she could not afford, buying things she did not need. Later in life, Robert, the surviving son, tearfully had his mother committed to an asylum, actually here in Batavia, Illinois, not too far from where we are now. She was committed, but she did not stay there for a short time. She wrote letters to friends in the spiritualist movement and things and was able to get released from there, and she went back to Springfield, Illinois, and lived, although not in the home that she occupied with her husband. She never again lived in that house. She went and lived with a sister in Springfield. And later in life, until she died, she always said she felt the presence of her husband with her, and she went to these spirit photographers, which was a very popular thing in those days, and they would photograph you, and supposedly in the background you could see images of your loved one. We do have a very famous photo of a ghostly image of the president behind her with his hands on her shoulders, and she said, yes, that's indeed it, and that is it. Although the photo has been proven to be a fake, she insisted that no, indeed, that was her husband, always with his loving arms around her and caring for her. Later in life, her last occupations in life, having lost 3 sons, and lost her husband. She only had Robert left and lived with her sister. Her main occupation in life was packing trunks and unpacking. She had many, many, many trunks of clothing and draperies and curtains and things that she had purchased over the years, and she was always packing and unpacking these trunks for trips she was never going to take. And then she herself died in the 1870s at 63 years of age. She passed away, Mrs. Lincoln. Okay. We have a few moments left here, and what I'm going to get to now is something I felt was kind of interesting. During the Lincoln years in the White House, not everything was sadness, of course. We had the Civil War raging in that. But then as now, we did have personalities that stopped in at the White House. One of these personalities was an opera star. Her name was Adelina Patti. Adelina Patti is largely forgotten today, but in her day, she was born in 1853, and she lived until 1919. So she made it into the era of sound recording. Adelina Patti, in 1905, when she was 60 years of age, did make some recordings for the Victor Record Company on the Victrola label. Patti was a big star in right. When she was a teenager, she appeared in the White House. She was doing a North American tour, and of course this tour in the 1860s would not involve the southern cities, because that would have been, the Civil War would have been raging. But she did appear in Washington, D.C., at some of the more famous opera houses, Philadelphia, Boston, and New York, and then on to Canada, and did the tour up there. And en route in this tour, she stopped at the White House and gave a performance for the President and Mrs. Lincoln. And what she sang was a song called Home Sweet Home, very sentimental old ballad. And supposedly she sang this with such feeling and such heartfelt, she just poured everything into it, that she moved the Lincolns to tears. And of course, this was right after they lost their son Willie, so sentiments ran very high with them. She sang this, and after this, she had such success with this, she included this on her concert tours, and all her life she did this song as a performance, an encore performance. She sang Home Sweet Home. One of the recordings we have is the recording of Adelina Patti singing the song. Now, she made these records in 1905 when she was 60 years of age, so her voice was past its prime for singing as far as operatic voices are concerned. But nonetheless, Victor did this kind of thing. They had a gentleman named Fred Geisberg that went all through Europe and Asia and sought out a lot of these famous opera singers and things that would otherwise have not made it to any of the Victor recording studios, and they recorded these folks. Patty was a big star. She would command in those days about $5,000 in gold per performance, tremendous amount of money. So she was a huge, huge star of the operatic stage. I don't know what she was able to receive in royalties for the records. She made about 30 recordings recorded with piano. They were not orchestra-accompanied recordings. And Patty did not go to the studio to record these. You came to her home. She had a huge castle in Wales called Craignor, where she lived, which is haunted. One of these days I'm going to do a show on haunted opera stars and things too, and we'll include a little more of these tales in it. Time doesn't permit it today. And you set the equipment up in Patty's home, and she had a piano accompanist that would accompany her in her singing. And when she so felt inclined to sing, she would do so, and she would sing into the recording horn, and you would make the record. So we're going to play this. This is something of a voice that transcended time. This is a lady that sang for the Lincolns, and here she is singing her signature song. Just give me one moment here to wind up the phonograph here, and we'll play this recording for you. All right, here we go. Okay, that is it. That is the voice, or was the voice, of Adelina Patti in a 1905 Victor recording. And that was the song Home Sweet Home, which, like I say, she sang at a performance in the White House, in the Blue Room, for the Lincolns, when the Lincolns were in office. So that's a voice that kind of transcended time. That's kind of interesting that we have a voice of someone who knew the Lincolns and sang for them and performed for them. That song, Home Sweet Home, like I said, became her signature song after she had such success with it in Washington and performing it for the president, that she included it in all of her concert tours and performances thereafter until she stopped performing altogether, I think in about 1916, and then she died in 1919. Incidentally, this record was done on a 12-inch, single-sided, red seal, like a celebrity recording, so it was only single-sided. You only got a recording on one side of the record, and these sold for $5. Now, this is 1905. $5 was a tremendous amount of money. The average man's wages in 1905, you earned about $5 a week for a man with a family. So this was something, obviously, that Victor Records was aiming at a higher upper-class audience. And it wasn't something for everyone, which also adds to the rarity of these records. They didn't sell a whole lot of them, so they don't turn up that often. So it's kind of nice. Okay, with that, I am going to end. This is Bob Trazik. We'll be signing off here with Paranormal Radio. We have about 2 minutes here. Like I say, if you're interested in doing a sponsorship with this show and sending a check to Mr. John DeVita here to keep the station going, and we'll do some advertising for you, go up on their website, www.windycityhometown.com. If you're interested in listening to this show that I did today, Paranormal Activity, this one here on the White House and the Haunts of the White House, you'll be able to find us on YouTube. We'll be up there probably within a day or 2 days. I was surprised how fast they did this the last time. He put it up, like in 2 days they put this up. We'll be on YouTube and punch up Paranormal Radio, and then today's date, which would be 218-13, and you'll be able to hear this show. Thank you so much. It's been a joy doing this. I love doing these kind of shows, and we'll be back again next month in March, and we'll be doing a show on, I'm not certain what I'm going to do. We'll do something, some other haunts, or maybe some New Orleans haunts we'll do next month. New Orleans is a great subject of mine, and then, of course, in April, we'll be doing some things on Titanic. And then you can also go up on my Facebook page, Bob Trazik, Facebook, and you can find out where I'm at, because I'm doing some tours and some lectures and things all over the place, and then also on my show with Wild Radio on 88.9 FM on Monday evenings. Thank you so much.